Well, I want to start with a strong vote of thanks. First of all, I never imagined that anybody celebrating any birthday would suddenly fill the hall. I mean, this is just extraordinary, and it gives a tremendous boost to those who have worked so hard ever since the foundation of the Balliol Medical Society, and of course one of the founders is indeed Robin Chowdhury, who together with the master Barry Bloomberg got all of this going, and it's been a terrific tradition. So thank you to all of you. But I also want to pay a thanks to the people who have been quietly moving around the meetings this afternoon and then into the recital and now here at dinner, the Voices from Oxford team. Andrew Graham referred to the fact that this college, together with the university of course, elected Lynn Margulis as its Eastman professor way back nearly 20 years ago now. It was 2009. She was a rebel. Her work on symbiogenesis was completely ignored by all the textbooks. How on earth? Where is Andrew? Oh, he's over. Oh, the light is in the way. I can see what the problem is. Yes. Well, we did many things together, but one of them, as he indicated, was the fact that we got this rebel of an evolutionary biologist responsible for having resurrected Konstantin Merechkovsky's idea in 1905 that mitochondrion was originally a bacterium. Utterly revolutionary, but turns out to be true, of course. Anyway, Voices from Oxford, after Lynn had walked up to Richard Dawkins' house in North Oxford and knocked on the door, and instead of a maid coming or whatever else might have been inside the house, anyway, Richard came to the door and she simply said, "Richard, I want a debate with you." Now, I have to tell you, they had been exchanging insults by what was then the equivalent of social media, and knew very well that they were on opposite sides on the whole issue of evolution. And she then came back to the college, came to lunch, and looked at me. "Are you Denis Noble?" I think she must have been a bit short-sighted. But anyway, I nodded. She said, "I want you to chair a debate with Richard." Couldn't believe that she'd fixed this up. Anyway, that was the first great recording that Voices from Oxford did, and it's still there on the internet. Researchers concerned to know how was Lynn's work ignored so comprehensively have, of course, used that documentation. It will never occur again, of course, because Lynn herself tragically died of a cerebral hemisphere problem just a couple of years later, and so did also one of the other contributors to that debate, Martin Brazier. But it takes me to an interesting question which I've been asked many times, both by evolutionary biologists and by medical scientists. What on earth made you switch in 2004? The answer is there was no switch. The work that I did, and that was highlighted by Peter Cole in his presentation in the afternoon, in 1992 convinced me of a very important fact. Association does not reveal causation. You see, if you can have 4 processes, each one of which can keep the rhythm of the heart continuing in the absence of any of the others, you will have a very low association score, and you will have, for any of them, the potential for massive causation. Even worse than that, after I'd made that discovery, or rather my team had made that discovery in 1992, I started looking up, this is way before retirement in 2004, I started reading the literature. I found low association scores are everywhere. Hillenmeyer and his colleagues did a fantastic series of experiments on yeast. 6,000 genes, they were able to get knockouts for nearly all of them. 80% in standard physiological conditions, so a zero association. But as soon as you put that yeast into a deprived environment, deprived of some of the nutrients that it likes, most of those then show an association. Now, some of you, aware of your genomics, will be seeing where this is going. 90% of the association scores for human genomics are small. What does that tell a physiologist? It tells you that there is massive backup. The functionality keeps going even when this component is missing, because it's backed up by many others. And it's worse still than that, because as Hillenmeyer and his colleagues showed in yeast, a zero association score can mean a big causation. So I asked the question, and this is what got me into evolutionary biology as a physiologist, not just suddenly changing field. I'd already got the evidence there was something wrong with relying on genomics to give you the answer to health and disease. And here I come to the message for the medical society. We're facing a crisis. You all know that. The health service is creaking. One of the reasons is that we've been very successful in the last century in curing the diseases of the young, but they've become the old. We are an aging population. So is Japan, so is Korea, so now is China, so is the United States. All the developed nations of the earth are facing the same difficulty. We have hugely expensive care for those who are suffering the diseases of old age, but we do not know how to cure them. A study was published in 2023 from University College London. The chief author of the study was Nicholas Volt, who, although a professor at UCL, actually lives in Oxford. I met him recently to discuss his work. What that study did was to take the polygenic scores, which of course we've got in the health service because we've got 25 years now of sequencing genomes and then knowing what subsequently those people suffered from. They tested by the same criteria that would use if you were testing a drug for approval by the FDA, using exactly the same statistics. The ability of the polygenic scores to predict cancer is almost useless. The prediction ability of the scores to predict cardiovascular disease, also useless. Same for schizophrenia. Think about that, because we were promised in 1999 by none other than the head of NIH at the time, and therefore the head of the Human Genome Project, that by 2010 you would take your genome to your doctor if you had cancer, and he would prescribe you what needed to be prescribed to cure it. Has anybody taken the sequence to their local GP to ask for advice on how to cure their disease? No. nobody would understand it either. What I'm suggesting to you is simply this: we've been taken in. And the medical community generally has been taken in by a promise that could never be delivered. That man, Nicholas Volt, was saying what he showed in 2023 in a publication in the British medical journal Medicine. That is, those scores cannot be predictive. They cannot be used as a screen. You would be creating as many disturbed by the prediction that they would get a cancer or would get cardiovascular disease as you help by informing them of that correctly. We've got somehow or another to find a way out of what I call the gene-centric impasse. But it hasn't succeeded in doing what we needed to do. We've got to find a way out. That's what I'm focused on at the moment as a project, being, well, one article already accepted for the Journal of Experimental Physiology, with another one to follow it up on exactly how now, as medical scientists, we find a way out of this impasse and back to what we used to be able to do, particularly during the great medical successes of the 20th century, which is to find cures for diseases. And my goodness, do we need that? So sorry to make a speech that ends up by being rather serious, but we had so much fun in the meeting this afternoon and tonight that I thought it was time at least to lay down a few serious issues that the medical profession has somehow or another to address. We have been taken in. I'm not accusing anybody deliberately doing that. I think people were perfectly right to go for sequencing genomes. It's been absolutely marvelous for getting the evolutionary trees in evolutionary biology much more accurately described than would otherwise have been possible. It's been fantastic for helping forensics in knowing who is related to who. It's been fantastic in laying the groundwork for the basic science of genes and how they make proteins, and in many cases they're not doing that at all, they're just producing RNAs, though we don't call those genes. Oh, but it gets terribly complicated, doesn't it? Anyway, if I'm to be accused of giving you a rather serious and perhaps rather depressing lecture, I think it's needed, because we have a big crisis in healthcare at the moment. I want to finish with another story that relates to the pandemic. Because during the pandemic, this became so serious. Of course, it was the old who were particularly vulnerable to COVID. I know that from personal experience. I was very badly affected by long COVID, as it became called, not actually the infection, but the aftermath of respiratory distress. It was actually a colleague of mine, a former graduate, well, postdoctoral student really, of mine from Korea, Professor Jung-eum, who made the right recommendation. He told me how to get myself out of that with some very simple physiological techniques. But during that period, I helped with one or two other medical science colleagues, and we founded the Oxford Longevity Project. You can look that up on the internet. It's now had nearly 5 years, is it, of successful annual meetings and a steady stream of information directed largely at the public to say what you do to help the National Health Service to keep you well. And the story, as probably you all know anyway, is very simple. It is good diet, exercise, and, well, here I come to echoes of some of the talks from the Oriental traditions here. some of you this afternoon will recall, there was a lot of emphasis on that. Oriental medicine has a very interesting concept. I think it corresponds to what we would call well-being or being on top. They have a word for it, qi in Chinese, ki in Japanese. It doesn't matter, it's the same concept. It is that essence of what it is to be human, or to be any other organism for that matter. Some of the work I've done in evolutionary biology is to explain why we have to bring back the concept of intention, the concept of purpose, and related issues. That, I think, is important. But what's even more important is to get across to people that it's best to think of being a patient, not just in terms of getting advice on what to do, but in helping those in the health service who are trying to help you, to be a good patient. That's what the Oxford Longevity Project tries to communicate. What did I do? Well, I act according to what my lectures are. At the age of 85, that must be 5 years ago now, therefore, I took up ballroom dancing. Well, I can tell you, there's nothing quite so good as that for keeping you on top and feeling great. And it's a big challenge for people to do it. I was privileged, as Sophie Marnett brought out in her talk this afternoon, to have been present at a marvellous concert, very unusual for a Balliol Sunday night concert. It was actually a pop group run by the professor of neutrino physics, David Walk. He's not here tonight, which is a shame. Otherwise, we would have had him in the music too, and we would have been dancing to it, which is precisely what Sophie and I did, because she started dancing just down in that corridor, and I joined her. Well, that's because I'd been taking up the whole thing. What I'm saying is we need to get the motivation back. Being on top is a key to keeping good health. And that's my main message for you tonight. And to your patients, encourage them to help you. And that's the way we'll succeed. Thank you very much.